Have you ever felt eyes upon you, even when you swore you were alone? Have you ever heard a distant tapping in the dead of night, only to find no one at the door? Tonight, I invite you into the unsettling world of an ancient Japanese urban legend, a presence said to stand over 8 feet tall. Some call her the 8-foot lady. Others know her as Hachishakusama. Whatever name you whisper, remember this: once she sets her sights on you, there is almost no escape. Welcome, dear viewers, to a story so disturbing that even seasoned lovers of the supernatural have difficulty sleeping afterward. Lock your doors, check your windows, and brace yourself. We're about to descend into one of Japan's most haunting legends, Hachishakusama, the mysterious woman whose abnormally tall figure looms at the edge of your vision, waiting for the moment you succumb to terror. 1. Legend Overview. The story of Hachishakusama, or literally 8 shaku tall, 1 shaku roughly equals a foot, dates back many decades, perhaps even centuries, depending on which source you believe. Shrouded in local gossip, cryptic records, and generational folklore, this mysterious spirit is not bound by one single location in Japan. However, some villages swear she was first spotted along deserted roads outside their community. Others claim she drifted in from a distant province, following an unsuspecting traveler. What is consistent across the countless versions of her legend is her eerie height, about 8 feet, and an otherworldly voice calling out, "Po, po, po, po," in a strange, hollow tone. Some survivors describe it as a muffled laugh, while others liken it to a broken chant that unsettles the deepest parts of their soul. Her attire is similarly inconsistent. Sometimes she's said to wear a white sundress and a broad-brimmed hat, other times a traditional kimono, or even old-fashioned work clothes. But all who have encountered her speak of one unshakable detail: she is impossibly tall, tall enough to peer over a 2-meter hedge without effort, tall enough to raise a bony hand to your second-story window. Most chilling of all, locals believe that Hachishakusama preys upon the naive curiosity of children or young adults when she fixes her attention on a young victim. That person has mere days before they vanish or suffer a horrifying fate. 2. Yuji's encounter. Our story begins with a teenage boy, let's call him Yuji, whose family home stands just 2 hours from the city by car. He always loved the rustic charm of his grandparents' farm, where he spent summer and winter vacations, away from the stress of modern life. This old farmhouse had many memories for Yuji: sipping tea with his elderly grandfather, listening to local ghost stories from his gentle grandmother. In those days, the farm felt like a safe haven, until one particular spring break changed his life forever. According to Yuji's own account, it was a crisp yet sunny day, the final stretch of early spring. The slight warmth coaxed him outdoors, so he passed the time on the porch, idly watching the breeze ripple through the grass. That's when it began. He heard an odd noise, po, 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 like a voice, but somehow distorted between a raspy breath and an eerie chant. As he scanned the yard, he noticed the top of a wide-brimmed hat bobbing along the tall hedges. Initially, he assumed it was a very tall man, or someone wearing platforms, but curiosity compelled him to lean forward. His blood ran cold the instant he realized the hedge was nearly 2 meters high, yet a slender female figure stood behind it, head and shoulders clearly visible. She wore a white dress, and from underneath the brim of the hat, he could just make out a face. The figure drifted along the yard, her gaze never meeting his directly, almost as though she floated. Then, as abruptly as she appeared, she slipped away from view, and the bizarre po-po-po trailed off into silence. That evening, Yuji described what he saw to his grandparents. At first, they offered polite nods, but when he mentioned the unstoppable height of this woman, the white dress, and the haunting po-po-po laugh, his grandparents went rigid with terror. His grandfather demanded more details. How tall was she? At what time did you see her? Exactly where did you spot her? The questions flowed so quickly that Yuji had no time to gather his own thoughts. He could see the alarm on his grandmother's face, her hands trembling. Suddenly, his grandfather left the room to place a phone call, speaking in a hushed tone. From the hallway, Yuji could barely make out the conversation, but he heard fragments of urgency in his grandfather's voice. Moments later, the older man returned and told Yuji, "You can't leave tonight. We have to keep you here. It's not safe for you to go home." Naturally, Yuji felt confusion and fear. He hadn't done anything to invite this tall stranger, nor had he ventured onto any forbidden property. Sensing his anxiety, his grandmother quietly explained, "It sounds like you've been seen by Hachishakusama. She's a tall woman, unbelievably tall. If she sets her sights on you, you have to follow specific rituals to avoid her." As it turned out, the entire region had long known of Hachishakusama's existence. The name means 8 foot tall, and her haunting presence was rumored to be sealed within the boundaries of the local village. Years ago, villagers placed stone Jizo statues around the perimeter to keep her from wandering elsewhere. Legend said that if she marked a victim, they had mere days left to live, unless they found a way to trick or repel her. 3. The seals and warnings. According to local lore, these 4 Jizo statues prevented Hachishakusama from freely roaming the land. An old agreement between villages had decided it was better to contain her in one area, despite the risk if it guaranteed certain privileges, like access to water or farmland. It was a precarious truce with the supernatural. Yuji discovered how real these stories were when his grandfather returned with an elderly neighbor named Kay, an expert in local spiritual matters. She carried a small wooden box of protective charms and offered Yuji a paper talisman, an ofuda, inscribed with esoteric writing. Together, she and the grandfather rushed upstairs to perform an impromptu spiritual sealing. The windows were lined with old newspaper pages and affixed with more ofuda. Bowls of salt were placed in each corner, and a small, unadorned wooden altar with a tiny Buddha statue was set up in the room. When they finally called Yuji upstairs, the seriousness in their eyes made his stomach twist. His grandfather spoke, "Listen carefully. You are not to leave this room until morning. No matter what you hear or what you think, keep this charm on you at all times. We won't call to you. We won't speak to you. And we certainly won't come knocking. If you hear someone at the door, do not respond. Do not open it. Before dawn, we will come for you at 7 in the morning. No earlier. Understand?" Shaken, Yuji nodded. He was provided blankets, a small lamp, and even a pair of portable toilets if he needed them in the night. It felt bizarre, but he could see, in his grandfather's stern face, that this was dead serious. 4. A night of terror. At first, Yuji tried to distract himself with television, but fear gnawed at him. He felt claustrophobic, startled by every small noise the house made. Eventually, exhaustion took its toll, and he dozed off in front of the flickering TV. He awoke in the darkest hours of the night, around 1 a.m., his heart pounding, uncertain what had pulled him from his sleep. Then, ever so faintly, tap tap tap, someone or something was lightly rapping on the window. Yuji's mind raced. It's just the wind, or maybe a tree branch, but a distinct, hollow laugh then drifted through the glass. Po, po, po. He tried to stay quiet, his breath hitching in his throat. The tapping continued, cautious, methodical, as if testing his resolve. Even more horrifying, a muffled voice called out, in what sounded like his grandfather's tone. "Yuji, are you still awake? You can come out if you want." He shot upright, remembering his grandfather's warning. "We won't call to you, no matter what you hear." Something outside was pretending to be his grandfather. Goosebumps riddled his arms. He clutched the Yehuda and fled to the makeshift altar. Kneeling before the small Buddha figure, he began praying, mind racing, tears welling up from sheer terror. Suddenly, the tapping escalated. A silhouette moved behind the newspapers taped to the window. Yuji could see it shifting upward, as though something extremely tall was lifting its arm to knock. Then came the laughter again. Po, 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 po. A drawn-out, unnatural lilt, the same voice he'd heard by the hedges earlier that day. Between the monstrous height and the shape-shifting voice, there was no doubt. Hachishakusama had found him. Minutes felt like hours. Eventually, the tapping waned, the laughter faded, and the looming shadow vanished. Yuji remained hunched in front of the altar, refusing to move or sleep for the rest of the night. 5. The convoy. As promised, at precisely 7 a.m., he heard footsteps in the hall. Multiple people, including his grandmother and the elderly neighbor Kei. When they opened the door, Kei gasped at the blackened balls of salt. Yuji's grandmother hugged him, tears streaming, in relief that he was still alive. Downstairs, the family had mobilized. Yuji's father had arrived, along with various male relatives from near and far. Outside, in the driveway, waited a van large enough to seat 8 or 9 people. They formed a convoy, Yuji's grandfather in the lead truck, the van carrying Yuji in the center, and the father's car in the rear. Before Yuji could protest, his grandfather guided him into the middle of the van's second row. "Keep your eyes closed and your head down," warned one of the older men. "We can't see her, but you can. If you open your eyes, you'll only invite more terror." It sounded dramatic, but after the night he'd endured, Yuji wasn't about to argue. He bowed his head, shutting his eyes. Still clutching the Ofuda, Kei began reciting a soft chant, something like a protective sutra. They drove slowly, under 20 kilometers, heading to the edge of town, where legend said Hachishakusama could not follow if the Jizo statues barred her path. But soon, the chanting from Kei became urgent. A wave of dread chilled Yuji as he heard that same inhuman laughter. Po, 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 po. echoing outside the van. He peeked through barely parted eyelids and saw the hem of a white dress passing by the window. The figure easily kept pace with the moving vehicle. Stooping unnaturally to peer in, Yuji stifled a scream as the face, a woman's face, with a wide, unnatural grin, tilted downward, as though searching for him in the glass. One of his uncles hissed, "Don't look," pulling Yuji's head downward. The glass vibrated under an insistent tapping. Everyone in the van was tense, some muttering prayers, others simply chanting nonsense to drown out the horror. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the presence faded. Kay exhaled shakily and announced, "We're past the boundary." A collective sigh of relief swept through the vehicle. They stopped at a rest area, so Yuji could switch to his father's car. Before parting, Kay handed him a new talisman, saying, "Keep it with you for a while yet. We're safe for now, but we must never be careless." 6. The aftermath and renewed fears. Upon arriving home, Yuji found his nerves frayed, haunted by every unexpected sound. His father admitted he'd known about Hachishakusama all along. He recalled how, in his own childhood, a friend disappeared after mentioning sightings of the tall woman. Another neighbor had relocated to a distant region after losing a family member to the same phenomenon. It was only the combined effort of multiple family members, many with shared blood ties, that seemed to break the link and fool Hachishakusama long enough to escort Yuji out of the village. The cost was significant. Yuji's grandfather later explained that had their plan failed, either he or Yuji's father might have been forced to serve as bait or a decoy. Deeply shaken, Yuji never returned to that rural home. He grew older, built a life in the city, and tried to forget the ordeal. Yet the memory lingered, overshadowing his youth. 10 years later, just as fear began to fade, Yuji's grandmother called with disturbing news. One of the old Jizo statues was destroyed, the one on the road leading to your house. His grandfather had already passed away by then, never reconciling his longing to see Yuji again with the terror that another visit might trigger. The grandmother explained that the statue's destruction meant Hachishakusama could have more freedom of movement, potentially able to roam beyond her traditional boundaries. Though there was no direct sign she'd reemerged, the knowledge weighed heavily on Yuji's heart. The memory of that resonant po-po-po laugh refused to disappear. Would she come for him again? Now that the seal was broken, would she seek out new victims? Once Hachishakusama fixes on you, she never truly lets go. She merely waits for her next opportune moment. 7. An endless legend. Though Yuji's experience is one of the best-known accounts, it is far from the only one. Over the years, countless individuals have claimed encounters with a woman of staggering height, her form half-glimpsed at night, her strange voice echoing across fields. Many of these experiences share overlapping themes: the unnatural po, po, po call, the towering silhouette, and a victim's abrupt disappearance. Some propose she's a vengeful spirit from an old tragedy. Others believe she's a yokai who manifests to feed on the life force of the unlucky. Still others argue it might be a case of mass hysteria, urban legends mingling with psychological fears. Yet for those who've heard that signature laugh outside their window in the dead of night, there is no question that Hachishakusama is terrifyingly real. In online forums, stories keep cropping up: a traveler waiting for a late train, glimpses a tall woman on a deserted platform. Then, in a blink, she's gone. Teenagers exploring an abandoned shrine discover footprints far too large to be human. A cyclist hears "po, po, po" while riding down a lonely country road and crashes in panic. Skeptics dismiss them as mere rumors, but believers warn that the moment you brush off the legend is when you're most vulnerable. 8. Epilogue and warning. Yuji eventually pieced together more of his family's hidden knowledge. His grandfather's generation remembered a prayer incident 15 years before Yuji's, when another child vanished. The grandparents had always feared that Hachishakusama would appear again. Yuji's grandmother once confessed to a neighbor, "I don't know if it's right to keep her sealed here, but the elders felt it was our obligation. By accepting the occasional risk, we gained water rights from neighboring villages and avoided other disputes. But it's a heavy price." She went on to describe how each family secretly taught their children never to open the window if they heard tapping at night, never to respond if a voice called them outside. Precautions passed down through generations, all to minimize the victims that Hachishakusama might claim. So there it is, the chilling account of Hachishakusama, the 8-foot lady. Some call her a spirit of vengeance. Others believe she's a yokai who found a foothold in local folklore. Whatever she is, one thing remains certain. Once you've seen her towering silhouette, once you've heard her otherworldly laughter, escape is no simple matter. Remember the Jizo statues that once contained her. Now that one of them is destroyed, she may walk freely beyond that village's borders, perhaps far closer to your own town than you'd care to imagine. Tonight, if you hear a gentle tapping on your window or sense a presence behind your garden hedge, take heed. Do not look outside, and never, ever respond, even if the voice calls to you in the tone of someone you love. Has Hachishakusama chosen her next victim? Could it be a curious traveler, a lonely child, or even someone watching this video right now? Perhaps that faint whisper you just heard was nothing but the wind, or perhaps it was her. This story doesn't end here. It continues to haunt internet forums, terrify those who dwell in remote Japanese farmsteads, and captivate horror enthusiasts around the globe. The next time the wind moans, "Po, po, po," will you be ready? Thank you for joining me on this dark journey. If you've enjoyed or simply survived this tale, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, stay safe, keep your doors locked, and try not to listen too closely to the sounds in the night. You never know when Hachishakusama might be passing by just beyond your window.